Welcome back, everybody, to A Little Less Fear podcast. I'd like to introduce Greg Wieting. He's a healer who helps leaders and entrepreneurs heal the anxiety, depression, chronic pain, and trauma they can't think of or the way out of it. Did I say that right? Think of or talk the way out of it. He's the founder of PRISMA. I like the sound of that. PRISMA, PRISMA, a framework overlaying trauma, neuroscience, and energy medicine with somatic and mindfulness-based practices. He developed this while healing his own anxiety, depression, and chronic pain rooted in trauma. That's many of us, by the way, so many of us. Actually, almost everybody, correct? Yeah. This
So
included unraveling a severe spinal curvature and standing 3 inches taller today. Whoa, I am barely 5 feet tall. Would love to stand three inches taller. That would be incredible. Over the last 2 decades, Greg has helped thousands heal through his one-on-one practice and has certified hundreds of healthcare professionals in his methodology. His new online course and community now making healing practical and accessible to all. Greg, thank you so much and welcome to A Little Less Fear podcast. How are you doing today?
hey, Lino, I'm well. Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. It's a little warm out here. Summertime right now here in Pasadena, California, and it's probably about 90 degrees, but the humidity is pretty high, so it feels pretty hot. A lot hotter than what it is.
Yeah, San Francisco, we have, more of a foggy, cool summer, but heading out to the Yuba River this weekend to get some 95-degree weather. So
Oh,
I've kind
wow.
of
We're
just
gonna be,
traveled for the heat.
I wouldn't mind swapping with you there. I love San Francisco. So, Greg, tell us about your journey. I'm curious, what brought you this? I can see that there was some trauma that you went through, and this brought you into more of like a spiritual awakening of sorts.
Yeah, I'd say that's accurate. I wasn't looking for a healing path. I think I stumbled upon it. I was working in the nonprofit world, had a very different, path in life, working in activism. But my own pain, it became a forcing function where I had to do something different, in college and, my adolescence, I was, just running from the pain, ignoring the pain, trying to suppress the pain in any way I could. And that only gets you so far. And the pain just gets louder and louder, the more you ignore it. So I kind of fell upon a healing practice by happenstance. I was introduced to energy medicine and Reiki through a friend who had offered me a massage. And at the time, I was just living in so much chronic pain that the thought of a massage just felt too painful. So I resisted that. And she said, well, we can just work, with the energy body, with, very light touch. And this was all foreign to me, had never heard of energy medicine or Reiki or healing. But the moment she started, I realized I found something I didn't even know I was looking for. My body just started to just release and just exhale. And my nervous system just started to land, and just started to locate a sense of presence and a sense of stillness that just seemed foreign to me at the time, but it was also kind of felt like coming home. So with that next year, I continued. I thought I'm onto something here. And so I continued to, explore and started to read about meditation and mindfulness and started to study within a year. Yeah, just dove right into learning energy medicine. And that's when the spine began to unravel and just pain started to kind of, yeah, just reorganize and restructure. So kind of coming more in alignment with myself.
Greg, before we continue, I'm certain there will be some listeners that I'm not familiar with Reiki. Could you describe what Reiki is in simple terms?
Yeah. I mean, Reiki is defined as universal life force energy. It's a hands-on healing practice. The energy of touch. There's, understandings that touch calms the cardiovascular system. There's a marked increase in white blood cell activity, which is, immune function. It helps to bring us into that state of rest and digest, the parasympathetic nervous system. So it helps to shift us out of that fight or flight mode. So, those pieces, calming the cardiovascular system, boosting the immune system, and helping us come into a regulated nervous system are very critical ingredients to healing.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah, absolutely.
so the elegance of Reiki is that it's just applied through touch and, that point of human contact where, patterns of trauma keep us feeling isolated and alone. And so when we can bridge when we can bridge that with the connection of human contact, that's where so much healing comes online. And once the nervous system lands, our physiology can come back into balance. Our hormones can balance, stagnant emotions that were leading to inflammation can start to flush out. And so we just, access just a healthier state of wellness, a state of being.
Thank you for that. So once you started to have Reiki done on yourself and you started to learn a little bit more about meditation, how soon, and actually, here's the first question. How often were you having this energy work done on yourself before you started to notice a difference in your body?
Yeah. Well, that first year, my friend lived about 2.5 hours away from me. So I'd go down and visit her maybe every other month. So it was like sporadic at first. But each of those experiences was like, you know, a breath of fresh air and just a sanctuary. Like, oh my gosh, I'm getting a taste of something I didn't even know it was possible. And each time you get a taste of something new, it kind of plants a seed, right? And it helps you develop a desire to want more of that. And, you may not fully capture that and be able to hold on to it at first. You're just planting seeds of possibility, um, which was enough for, a year later when I moved to Seattle. I, started studying Reiki, and I was probably receiving Reiki and other healing modalities, every other week. But that really, yeah, started just a journey of transformation. And pretty early on, energy medicine, I look at it as healing, kind of bringing us into more of a neutral place. So we're not holding on to the energetic charge of emotions and of thoughts. And, the subconscious and the unconscious mind take up residence within our body, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so what we can't make sense of intellectually lives inside our body. And that's often then what's showing up as our chronic pain, the anxiety, the depression. And so, I felt over time that was just starting to fall away, and to better make sense of that pain, and I think the mindfulness component of healing is kind of reorienting the mind. We get so identified with our pain, we get so
Right.
identified with our wounding, and it's reorienting the mind from our pain to possibility, right? So it's like kind of like taking ourselves out of this hole or this pit and being able to look at the horizon, that there's something more than just pain. And again, that's not like a one and done, and it's not an overnight thing. You're just getting glimpses of that. You're getting a taste of it. And each time you get another taste of it, you start to build momentum. And in that momentum, you can kind of lean into that process of discovery with more trust. And that momentum and that speed just have a, an effect that just, continues to carry you through.
Greg, how did you build the momentum to help the curvature of your spine? That sounds almost impossible.
Yeah. And I've had plenty of healthcare professionals tell me that's impossible. And I think there's a lot of limitation placed on what's possible, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to answer your question, but a side note, there's over 200,000 cases of spontaneous remission in cancer,
Mm-hmm. Right.
but we don't
Yeah.
research that, and we're
Exactly.
not we're not curious about what healing mechanism is at play, you know, with those numbers. Um, and so, healing is helping us activate that innate wisdom that is at play. Um, you know, I, so yeah, I like that the idea that if the body, mind, and spirit are a symphony orchestra, all of our muscles, our tissues, our cells, our emotions, our memories, our thoughts are all part of this orchestra. And when the orchestra is making music, all these different parts are playing in unison. So there's this harmonic resonance, and we're making sweet music. When we have trauma or stress, illness, and disease, it's like the nervous system gets short circuited. So these different parts start to forget that they're playing for the same,
The
team, or
same
that
orchestra.
yeah, they're no longer aware that they're part of the same orchestra, and they turn
Yeah.
their backs on each
Wow.
other.
Makes sense.
So, so healing is helping these different parts come back together. right? So, that's a gradual process, right? It's not, there's no silver bullets to healing. Everyone wants that quick fix. But it's really helping the body, mind, and spirit find a harmonic resonance where we can come back into the musicality of our being. So for me, over a handful of these healing sessions, that just helped my system start to make better sense of itself. If I were to break that down a little further, the connective tissue and fascia is what holds our bones and our muscles together. The connective tissue and fascia is also where we store trauma. It's where we store beliefs.
Oh my
So
goodness.
if we're carrying pain from a past
It's
wound,
connecting us all together.
yeah, and
Wow.
we're being held together by our pain, right? If we're being held together to our pain, there's probably some identification with wounding and victim consciousness and guarding and protecting the world's not safe. So then that becomes an entire costume or posture that we
Oh my
start to
goodness.
assume or wear. So energy medicine is just helping to neutralize these charges. It's helping to locate more safety so the nervous system can land, right? Because again, if we're organized around victim consciousness, then our heartbeat is probably, not at a resting state.
Right.
Our immune system is, a little
Completely
on
out of whack.
edge, right? So again, if the function of energy medicine and healing is to calm the cardiovascular system, reboot immune function, and let the nervous system land, then the body's innate wisdom has a remarkable capacity to then heal the trauma that's been stored in the tissues. And as that trauma heals, then the tissues are no longer holding the muscles and the bones in this survival protective, posture,
Mhm.
right? Then the organizational intelligence of the system gets to repattern the tissues, the cells, the muscles, the hormones. So then beliefs, behaviors all start to, shift kind of in tandem to the physical body. I keep using this word innate wisdom. So that was a word developed in chiropractic. So, if we get a paper cut, there's an innate wisdom or a healing mechanism that sends platelets and proteins to orchestrate all these biochemical transmissions to heal the paper cut, right? So when the symphony orchestra is playing in harmony, we have like a direct line to that innate wisdom. We're just completely connected to it. But again, each time there's an injury, stress, trauma, and we get short circuited and the nervous system gets flooded or overwhelmed, we lose connection to that innate wisdom. And over time, we can feel like we're completely cut off from that innate wisdom, right?
Oh yeah.
So the more we align to that innate wisdom, the more our body, mind, and spirit is in touch with its own understanding of how to be itself, how to live in its own harmonic
The
understanding.
way it's supposed to.
Yeah, just to live in harmony. The body is designed to heal. We just want to be in touch with the mechanism of healing that supports it to be in balance.
It sounds like you have an excellent understanding on how you came to heal, but how did it start? Like, how did you actually start to connect the mind, body, and the soul into alignment?
I mean, it was again through the happenstance of meeting my friend and then just receiving this work. It's a happening. Healing
So,
is
what
not
did you do
doing.
like in between your friend, that month or so that you waited in between seeing your friend? How did you help yourself?
Yeah. I mean, I look at healing as, following breadcrumbs where, that experience gave me a taste of something. So that taste, helps me plug into a desire that, oh, I want to feel good. I don't want to live in pain. I also was really clear that at that point, I kind of realized I didn't want to take the route of antidepressants or pain meds. That just didn't feel like the right path for me. So that desire, you know, helps to kind of reorient your mind, right? To, well, what's possible and how do I become resourceful to help myself? So, I started to, gather books on meditation and mindfulness. And then when I started to study Reiki, my Reiki teacher had studied with, a lineage of meditation. So that led me into deeper meditation practice, which led me to India for 9 months. So then I had this Reiki and energy medicine practice and this meditation practice. I came back to the States, and then I started to study yoga and Ayurveda, which was just deepening into kind of an understanding of the subtle energy body. And then when I moved to California, one of my first students, as I was teaching kind of an integrated Reiki, yoga, um, mindfulness training over 6 months, one of my students was a therapist, and she said, you're teaching a trauma-informed approach to healing. And although I was aware that I was healing my own trauma, I hadn't studied trauma at the time. It was just my own lived experience that I teach from a lot of lived experience, as I gathered the tools that have helped me along the way. And so as she shared that, she suggested that I study with her. And so I became her teacher's assistant at the California Institute of Integral Studies, where she was teaching a trauma course in the psychotherapy department. And she asked me to teach mindfulness-based practices to help the students kind of more deeply embody and integrate, what they were learning in the course. So then that's where I kind of gathered my entire knowledge base around trauma. And so it's like building these different knowledge bases and practices now kind of has helped me create what I'd call a roadmap that really helps, my students and my clients kind of have an understanding of the landscape of healing, so they know kind of where they're at and where they're headed. I think I'd spent, some years in therapy knowing I was, on the right track, but not really knowing where I was headed. And so I've created this roadmap that, yeah, just helps us feel like we can take the blindfold off and get our bearings straight. Um,
Are you able to share a little bit on that roadmap?
Yeah, so the pillars on that roadmap, a bunch of somatic and mindfulness-based practices. Number one, for nervous system regulation. So an entire pillar and module around how to become aware of the nervous system and, its drives, the fight, flight, freeze, appease response,
Mhm.
and how to understand it and work with it. So then when the nervous system gets flooded and we, are no longer in an optimal zone of arousal, we kind of have flipped our lid and we've lost access to our upper brain of reason, and we've defaulted to kind of our survival brain, how to recover from that. And a lot of that's around deriving safety, right? Feeling safe to inhabit our own lived experience. So the second module, or the second pillar rather, is embody. You know, like you see a bird that flies into a window and then drops to the ground. You think the bird is dead, but usually it's just in a freeze response, right? The shock of flying into a window, it's in complete shock.
Mhm.
So it dissociates, it leaves the body because it's literally would be too painful for the bird to consciously feel the impact of flying into the window. So we have we have left our bodies in more ways than one because the impact of life is sometimes too hard.
Very true.
So a big piece of healing is learning how to come back into the body in a safe way. Learning how to take up space and inhabit ourselves, and that's where we get more in touch with our own instinctual wisdom. We're pretty good at thinking our way through life, but that's rather strategic, and the more we think about life, the less we're having a direct experience of life. So embodiment helps us become more present, and in that presence, our ability to feel ourselves, we have a lot more agency, a lot more agency. So the third pillar is attunement, emotional attunement, and really being able to track our emotions and gather the emotional intelligence, like the message beneath our emotions, and how to work with our emotions in a way that helps us bridge connection. And a lot of that's mapping unmet needs in early development where we maybe have lacked a secure attachment. And so bringing understanding to that, and then, feeling the emotional impact of that so we can land in a more secure place within ourselves. Um, Orientation is the fourth pillar, and that's really locating a sense of belonging within our hearts. And I think tied into healing, we're often motivated to get out of pain. Um, but what about being inspired to move towards possibility? And so, I think that helps us find a place of balance where we're not in this over adrenalized state of stress that leads to burnout, where we can fulfill and live in our values in a place that feels aligned, where we're not overriding our nervous system, where we're not overriding our capacity. So yeah, deriving more of a sense of ease. And I like that idea that, motivation is great for a sprint, but inspiration is really good for a marathon. To sustain our life force energy. And then narration is the next pillar. When we're organized around pain, we have lots of limiting beliefs and narratives and behaviors that are likely to sabotage us. They're likely to keep us small. The lie of trauma is often I can't. And the truth of healing is we can. So updating the narrative, flipping the script, having more generative narratives that are in fulfillment of our highest good. And then the
So
sixth,
within these pillars, Greg, you're doing self-affirmations.
um, not so much affirmations, but offering tools and frameworks of understanding through somatic and mindfulness-based practices to, um, a big piece of healing is self-inquiry. And
Mhm.
so better understanding, the subconscious and unconscious drives, reconciling, where those drives have come from, and then developing enough capacity and enough insight to create a new path forward. So we're not defaulting to survival, victim consciousness, fear, and pain, which is often, on a call with a client today, much of their life has been organized around anxiety and scarcity. It's like until recently, that's who they thought they were.
Mhm.
And now they're having a completely different experience of who they are and what's possible in their life. So they are kind of on rapid fire, creating a new framework of how they see themselves and see the world. And that's shifting kind of from a narrow worldview to kind of expanding the aperture of possibility. But then a big part of that, the next pillar is identity, right? Because we often have a very fixed and rigid idea of who we are that's often organized around our pain. And really, again, the self inquiry takes it to that next level that who we are is change. And, the nature of life is impermanence. And so, if we have organized our sense of self around the lack of a secure attachment, as we develop a more secure attachment, then we have more space to feel into the uncertainty of moment to moment awareness, which helps us become more fluid. And I think that's really where we gain more access to our creativity. And
Absolutely.
then the final pillar is impact, right? How do we then, so I look at all of these pillars kind of helping take us on a journey from pain to purpose. And that's where we can make meaning from the most adverse experiences of our lives and locate a sense of place and purpose that helps us locate some significance in, and that sense making becomes a really powerful healing force unto itself.
So I'm assuming that prior to you coming in contact or learning how about these pillars, did you create these pillars yourself?
Yeah. So what I've done is reverse engineered everything I've gathered from energy medicine, somatic and mindfulness based practices, trauma and neuroscience, and which I've been teaching for, over the course of the last 20 years, kind of reverse engineered that. And to how does that make sense? How do I now teach all of these concepts and principles in a framework that is more accessible and practical for other people?
Hmm.
So they don't have to spend as much time traveling to India and, studying all these different pieces. I can just offer them a map.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Greg. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Going back to the first question, I'm really fascinated by you growing 3 inches. That's amazing. And I'm wondering, were you able to feel, and I'm asking you this question because I've also had on my podcast Ann Hint, who had scoliosis really bad, and she also grew about 2.5 inches using her own mindfulness technique. And she recalls when the spine was actually starting to straighten up, she could hear the tissues in her body straightening out. Did you have similar experience?
The first The first phase of that unraveling was after a specific healing session with my therapist at the time. And yeah, I got off of a massage table, stood up, and just, yeah, my spine just started to readjust. So there was some cracking and just, yeah, some,
Yes, that's what she said. It's
um,
amazing.
yeah. And so again, we're no longer being held by this rigid idea of who we are, which then allows the organizational intelligence of who we are to reassert itself and to restructure and reconstellate in a new harmonic resonance, right? That if we locate safety, if we locate presence, then who we are can live in a very different vibrational intelligence than when we are living in pain and survival.
Did you also do any type of like mindful exercises, manifestation exercises, and envisioning your cells working together and your tissues in your body and your fascia all coming together in order to get that alignment, or was that just done the other ways that you've explained?
Yeah. So at first, you know, with energy medicine, again, we're just breaking up the noise. So then all these disparate parts can come back into a new harmonic resonance, which then allows the realignment to happen on its own. So a lot of the realignment happens despite us. So I'll often joke with my students and my clients because I think a lot of people come to me after they've been in years of therapy and they've been trying to talk and think their way through it. Um, and the beauty of energy medicine is that we can kind of circumvent the mind and sometimes the limitation of the mind, then the loops of the mind that are keeping us stuck,
Mm-hmm.
and access the system at more of that level of the body's innate wisdom that heals the paper cut, where then healing becomes a happening instead of a doing. So I think there's some part of healing that we create the climate for the innate wisdom just to come online and assert itself. And yet I think the more we are in alignment with that innate wisdom, then we can become um, more like co-pilots with that innate wisdom. So then, yes, I think within each of the pillars, there is a sense of, well, who am I when my nervous system is regulated? Who am I when I am embodied and live in presence? And so, sure, there we can develop I am statements and affirmations that then help to train the mind to live into that vibrational quality. So I think that's where the mindfulness is the retraining of the mind. Okay, the mind is defaulting to this I am statement. I am this, I am unsafe, I am stuck, I am whatever the limiting belief is. And so that's the narration module. And it's like, well, maybe that's not true, right? Maybe that's just a feedback loop and a tape that's playing. So if I take a step back, the mindfulness is let me observe that thought, let me observe the vibrational pattern, the behavior, the belief around that thought. Oh, recognize that that behavior, belief, and thought is not me. Who I am as the witnessing consciousness, which is far more expansive than this limited vibration. Okay, well, if who I am is this witnessing consciousness, not this limiting vibration, can I put words to that? Oh, I am expansive. I am powerful. I am present. I am capable, whatever that may be. And so, yes, I think it can be useful to bring words to that and like state claim. And I think that's the power sometimes of mantra and like, bringing, calling things into existence through word and being impeccable with our word. And a lot of that repatterning happens even on a non-verbal level, on just more of a pure vibrational level of energy. So, yes and no. Long answer to your question.
What does it mean to you to be impeccable with your word?
I think noticing, oh, it is the word coming out based on default, based on the left brain dominance that is past and future oriented, or is it an alignment with, yeah, an expanded awareness that is, you know, arising from the present moment, and is that in alignment with my highest good, right? I think a lot of, you know, a big part of this work too, like neuroplasticity is the rewiring of our brain, which we can't do with when we lack safety. So again, when we learn to regulate the nervous system, we can land inside of ourselves. Our imagination literally creates the structure of our brain, for better or for worse,
Yeah.
right? So the trauma patterns that we often default to are structuring the pattern, the structuring our brain for worse, right? I'm not safe. I can't. This isn't possible. Whatever detrimental beliefs and thoughts we may have. So again, it's stepping out of that matrix, coming into alignment with what is more true, what is more possible, and then speaking into that, calling that into existence. And it's not so much thinking it, it's feeling it. It's feeling the vibration of that. And so finding the alignment vibrationally with that word, with that intention.
I love it. Greg, who were you before when you were in pain, and who are you now?
Yeah, the pain body was the overarching identity structure that I was carrying through the world, um, which was a heavy load, right? And if I'm no longer carrying that pain body, um, there's just less posturing, less hiding of self, less performing of self, and so there's just more space to be, right? So a lightness of being, um, and in that lightness of being, there's possibility, right? A lot of possibility. So um, more in alignment with just like the creative impulse of my life, which is very powerful, very alive.
That's beautiful. You speak very eloquently. Thank you for that. What is one thing you want the world to know?
A lot of folks come to me when they're at the end of their rope. Um,
Wow.
a lot of folks come to healing, with good reason. They're in a lot of pain. And while there may be a lot of solutions out there, I think a lot of folks are busy chasing symptoms, suppressing symptoms, fighting against symptoms. You know, how my orientation to healing is to actually help the body express the symptoms. So they're no longer living inside of us. And as we express symptoms, we can understand them, make sense of them, and no longer fight against them, integrate them, which is not an easy path and it's not a quick fix. But I think a lot of folks find me when they've tried everything under the sun and they haven't found what works for them. So follow those breadcrumbs. For me, it was this first introduction to Reiki and then an introduction to meditation, and none of those pieces on their own were the full answer, right? It's more me now forming an entire web of tools and frameworks and support. um, we're social creatures, so we're not meant to live in isolation, and we're certainly not meant to heal in isolation.
So
So
true.
don't give up, follow the breadcrumbs, follow support, and know that, again, the more you keep leaning in, the repair experience we have in one area of our healing is going to build more trust into the process that we can then keep leaning into. And that's when we start to gain that momentum and that speed. Um, so follow the breadcrumbs and don't give up.
I love that. Follow the breadcrumbs. How can our viewers, our watchers, and our listeners find you?
Yeah, gregwhiting.com, Wieting. So that's where folks can learn more about me, how to work with me one-on-one, which starts with a phone conversation, which you can schedule there. It also takes you to prismamethod.com, where you can learn about, the entire body of my coursework, the trauma and neuroscience roadmap. I look at the somatic and mindfulness-based practices, kind of the GPS. We have an online community, which is, our travel companions, a Slack channel that's curated. And then the energy medicine piece is really the vehicle for healing. So providing all of those tools and frameworks in an online community. And so, yeah, and Greg_Whiting on Instagram if people just want to start to get a taste.
I will find you today and I'll follow you. Thanks so much for being on A Little Less for Your podcast. Thanks for sharing your love, light, and all of your incredible energy work. This is amazing what you're doing for people, and I'm certain this is your path to follow. And it's just such a beautiful path that you're on right now, Greg.
Thanks, Lena. It's really great to be here with you.
Thank you so much. Let's stay in touch.
Absolutely.